Welcome to another episode of What's Blooming. This week, we're incredibly lucky to welcome Josh Alvernia, CEO of Clue, a performance marketing partner based in Toronto. Frank and Josh will be discussing the changing digital landscape in regards to cookies and device IDs and its impact on advertisement. If you want to learn more, keep watching.
Hey, hello. So today we have Josh. How are you, Josh?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
So it's great to have you here with us today. I have some questions for you, and I would like to hear about your perspective, but let's start with Clue. So can you give us a little overview of what Clue is and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So Clue is a performance marketing partner for agencies like Bloom, as well as brands. What we've kind of figured out, and the thing that drives everything that we do, is this understanding that when you plan media, you're completely focused most of the time on the output. What's the audience you're targeting? Where are you going to place the ad? But the moment that the campaign launches, the only thing that marketers care about is the accountability, is the outcomes. So what we understand and what drives Clue is the understanding that in performance marketing, measurement matters as much as media buying. And so we build custom solutions for our clients to bridge that gap so they can have both and drive growth.
Perfect. That gives us a good idea of what a Clue is. Basically, the digital landscape is undergoing a major transformation this year, next year. Can you provide a high-level overview of what is happening in the digital space right now?
Yes, of course. Actually, I'm going to quickly share my screen so that we have some visual aids when it comes to that. So just to kind of reiterate what is happening in the digital space, what we're seeing is that an easy way to kind of describe it is maybe that we are moving from big data to small and wide, or meaning that the two data points in which the media buying ecosystem had. And when you buy media, there's two types of addressable inventory types. There is web and there is app. And no matter what media buying platform you're using, or if it's a closed garden or a walled off garden, or if it's the open ecosystem, they kind of break up into those two types of opportunities. And those were usually categorized web by cookies and app by device ID. And what we're starting to see is that the availability of those types to all people and all platforms everywhere are starting to be closed off. And so you're seeing that, even the addressable web today, when it comes to cookies, we really only have about maybe 50% of all opportunities available to us. And so you can even see that when we look at what's happening with IDFA across the world, with the introduction of iOS 14.5 and the rapid adoption of all of these different points, you're starting to see that in the bid stream across all of the major partners that were involved in this particular study, and you could see that they're almost all of the really big guys and the important players in the ecosystem, that you're starting to see a lot of the addressable web when it comes to app inventory is no longer being provided with an ID. But there's a lot of opportunity here. And you could see that because when things aren't being provided with an ID, the cost of media is being reduced greatly. And that's mostly because even in large platforms like one of our partners, the Trade Desk, there's a little button you can click that literally says you only want to bid on inventory that has an ID. And this is a migration that people need to make, because that is no longer going to be massively scalable. And you can see there's an incredible price efficiency. There's an amazing opportunity on the other end. So what does that mean that the landscape is going to look like at a later date? Well, we believe that it's going to be something like this. And this is a visual that's actually been shared around the web. It wasn't necessarily created by Clue, but we think it's a really good understanding of how the identity landscape is going to look. It's basically going to be 2 by 2. Open, anonymous and authenticated, closed, anonymous and authenticated. And I'll kind of walk you through the different pieces right now. So when it comes to the closed ecosystem, in which people are the most understanding of, let's look at what we call walled gardens, and let's look at authenticated walled gardens. And this is what happens when a single entity, like Amazon, for example, is a really good example for this, has both the inventory, the audience data side, as well as the demand side. And so let's say somebody goes onto Amazon.com, types in a search query, the page that they are dropped onto has a banner opportunity or maybe a search opportunity. They click through that, eventually go to the Amazon listing and convert at that Amazon listing. Because the email ID is logged in through every single point of that journey, the entire thing is authenticated. And so advertisers can get what they want, which is the full accountability down to return on ad spend. But if you as a person were to leave Amazon.com, and let's say the advertiser didn't have a pixel on their site or weren't able to tie into the ecosystem or deliver to Amazon the user ID off of their walled garden, would they be able to authenticate it? No, they wouldn't. And so that is where we start to get into the anonymous but closed ecosystem of browser solutions. Under this, you can also kind of put the SCAD network or Apple's ecosystem under that network, meaning that across, because of the portal that the user interacts with, their Apple device or their Chrome browser, there is potential that a single entity can follow that activity, and it is authenticated to them. Who is it anonymous to? The marketer. Because what the solution necessarily is that they're offering is that you send them user level data. You batch thousands of users together because they require you to batch them together, because what they're doing is they're just delivering back to you a report. For example, I had 10,000 people download my app in the last week. How many of these people were also present in my media campaign? And the number comes back to you as 2,000. Because it is grouped together, there is a limitation in terms of what marketers have experienced in the past, where you're able to trace it back to a specific website and calculate ROAS from a single user's journey from across multiple different ecosystems, because cookies enabled you to do that, because device IDs enabled you to do that. It's starting to become more of an aggregate report, which is directional and can provide accountability, but it is not the same thing that you experienced before, where it would be applicable to lookalikes in the way that you experienced them before, or retargeting in that same way. And so those are kind of the two, in a very, very high level view and without a lot of caveats in them, the two kind of opportunities in the closed ecosystem. On the open ecosystem, this happens when you are operating with publishers that do not own the exchange and the demand side, and so they intermingle in an exchange all together. They're using the pipes of some other sort of technology provider, and there's kind of two opportunities here. There are alternative IDs. Now, these alternative IDs still require cookie level, or they still require an authenticated email. There is still something that needs to authenticate them. Good examples of these are Unified ID or our partnership that we have with LiveRamp. They are able to convert an event that happens, if they can authenticate it, into a user ID that should be consistent across connected TV, that should be consistent across device ID, that should be consistent across cookie IDs. So you're talking about device IDs of multiple formats or a cookie ID, but it also then should be able to be consistent across a hashed email event, allowing you to do those sorts of things that you've experienced within the walled gardens or within the browser solutions, like offline attribution, cross-device attribution. Now, what we're seeing, though, is that if you really optimize your ecosystem, the target rate in which you can have authenticated IDs could be something like 30%. And so that means that 70% of the ecosystem, when you are operating within an open exchange of multiple different publishers offering up their amazing content and inventory, it might not come with authenticated IDs. And so what does that mean? What do you no longer have? And that's just basically everything besides the ID. And there's the opportunity that, okay, well, there's still a lot of data there. How do I use that? And some people, some of the solutions that we are investigating and or bringing to the market are things like, okay, well, the DSP data and the SSP data is still there. When you look at, for example, what you would receive from a bid stream, you're losing, all of the things in yellow, for example. But if you were to extrapolate that and bring it up, there's still so much data that could be available to you. And so how then do you use automation? How then do you use algorithmic ways of evaluating the features of a successful ad and optimize to those instead of necessarily the user ID? And in the previous insight, I showed you where the CPMs are dropping by almost 70%. There's an incredible cost efficiency there that could be possible, because really at the end of the day, if you, for example, are behind that ad on a publisher, you yourself are still valuable, even if necessarily that marketer can't see you or validate their work. The opportunity to the brand to convert somebody and grow their business is still there. So how do you reconcile those two things? And this is what we believe the identity landscape is going to be. It is not that accountability in media is gone forever. It is that there is now an incredible fragmentation of ecosystems, and you have to operate in each one of them individually with different tactics and different approaches. And the IDs that people have come to know, cookie and device ID, they are now fragmenting into many different IDs. IDs for specific walled gardens and specific platforms and specific publishers and specific alternative partners. Now, how do you reconcile that? How do you coordinate all of that? That's the true challenge. And there's a lot of exciting opportunities in technology today that are coming onto the market that, we are excited to lead.
I have a question in mind related to this, more related to advertisers. So which challenges do advertisers face in regard to privacy regulations or the phasing out of the third-party cookies?
Yeah, so those are kind of two different things. Now, when it comes to cookies, it means that the addressable web is being reduced. So when it comes to validating the effect of a campaign, that becomes harder. And it also becomes harder to do things like retargeting and segmentation and lookalike modeling. So the functionality of your campaign changes a lot. And that is an entirely different thing necessarily than privacy. So when we talk about cookies, and I'll just kind of wrap up that point, it's that cookies are going to be replaced by many different IDs. And instead of a marketer having one platform be able to use that consistent ID across many different landscapes, all of a sudden the job of the agency becomes a lot harder, because you have to operate uniquely in many, many different ecosystems, which is, I think, is an opportunity for agencies, because a lot of the concepts around in-housing were happening because of this, maybe the simplification of the ecosystem. And if it becomes fragmented, more complicated, third-party services become more valid, especially in the short term. Now, when it comes to privacy regulations, one of the major problems is it's constantly changing. And I think government regulators are heavily influenced by large tech, because those are the people that are making donations to their campaigns. So it might not be wonderful, let's say, when it comes to marketers like Clue or marketers like agencies that are trying to build unique and independent solutions. It might make it difficult for us. Now, when it comes to a brand, it's a little bit of a different thing. Each geography has its own laws. So if you are an international brand operating in Canada and operating in the States, or even if you're an international brand that's operating in California and the rest of the States, you have to manage differences in each geography and how that works, which means that you also need to have things like audit logs, where if you were to be evaluated by a government agency as to whether or not you are following the regulations, you need to show the event in which you collected the data, the consent string in which it happened, how you are utilizing it, whether or not you are transferring it across ecosystems, how all of that is managed. That is an evolving process. And I feel like that is the major challenge today, is more, how do you show that you're following privacy regulations, and do you know what each geography requires of you?
We've seen a few tech giants come out with their solutions to face these challenges. How are you tackling the challenge at Clue?
Yeah, so one of the major things that we've done is we have done an audit of a lot of our data sources. The major problem today is, how do you attach first-party data to the media ecosystem? Because the main thing that everyone's still, like the main thing that's under strife right now, in addition to segmentation, is really attribution. How do you prove the validity of what you're doing and why you're valuable, and the return on ad spend that you're driving for a brand? So what we've done is we've done a couple of things. We've created a product called Clue Connect, which allows us to more efficiently manage a client's first-party data. We've noticed that there's generally like 3 data points that are always required in order to do attribution. And you kind of know this too if you're like really heavily involved in Facebook or the Google ecosystem. There is the cookies that come from pixels. There are the device IDs that come from any sort of in-app event that a marketer might have in their own first-party app. And then there is kind of this really expansive world that's usually pivoted by a hashed email. And those can come from a CRM system, from a point of sale system. The problem is now if you need to be across all of these different ecosystems, you're going to be bugging developers a lot, right? So how do you embed one data management platform, or Clue Connect, into a brand so that you integrate only once? And then from there, if the engagement expands to many different platforms and many different approaches, it doesn't take a lot of strain on a client's internal development team, because usually they don't really want to give a lot of hours to marketers anyways. And you then have the ability to apply a holistic measurement practice that, even though maybe now, because device IDs and cookies are gone, you can't say this was the unique reach across everything, it at least allows you to say, I'm evaluating the same points inside of my business for every single thing. Now, for programmatic, you didn't have hashed emails, right? Those platforms, Trade Desk, any sort of independent platform that we really like to leverage at Clue, they don't have that ability internally, because their whole platform is really built on device IDs of different various types, connected TV, mobile ID, as well as cookies. So we've then made a partnership with a company called LiveRamp, which allows us to then convert all of those types of IDs into a single ID, where then we can evaluate the user journey across all of those points. And then finally, we are really, really bullish on graph analytics, meaning there is a migration that's happening right now in the analytics space, where relational databases and the ability to kind of compare to or relate to data sets using joins is no longer going to cut it when you move to tens of different ID types and you're trying to coordinate all of that. So we are evangelizing the concept of using graph databases to coordinate all of those things and to map user journeys in places where the connecting points are sometimes unintuitive, or you're not able to plan. And so you need to use things like algorithms to find how things are connected to itself, which makes it much, much easier to do things eventually like probabilistic attribution. And that's the kind of stuff you're seeing right now Facebook talk about, where they're about to do a new announcement next month where there's going to be some extrapolation that makes it so they assume that they've had this effect on your campaign. We want that ability at Clue. And so that's kind of what we're doing.
What will the industry look like 1 to 2 years from now?
Yeah, so we're kind of already seeing it right now. There are essentially all of the players are kind of closing their walls. Or it's not necessarily that they're closing their walls, but each platform is coming out with their own ID type. There's a couple of like universal-esque IDs, like unified ID, that a couple of platforms are jumping in on and some other publishers are operating with. But it seems like what marketers are going to deal with is that there's no longer just going to be two different data points that you got to work with, cookie ID and device ID. There's now going to be unified ID and a Google ID and a Roku ID and a TikTok sort of identifier. And there's either going to be two types of ways that you get data, either by working in those kind of browser solutions or the SCAD network solution or something like that, where you send them user level data and they spit back a report to you. Those reports are not necessarily going to be operable with each other. So how do you coordinate all of those different data points, but within a singular perspective? That, I think, is going to be the marketer's job. That also means that building partnerships with some of the larger, more scalable platforms is going to be a big opportunity, especially like for Clue or for anyone. When you do want to get some sort of deterministic ID and be able to use that at scale for analytics. So I think players like obviously like Roku are going to have a really big place, and you could already see Amazon starting to close off their walls. I don't think that Google's browser solution is going to have as much of a punch as they thought, because already, there was an announcement in DigiDay that said that Amazon is going to be blocking Flock's penetration into their ecosystem. So what I think is there's just going to be a massive amount of fragmentation, which means that when it comes to solving the analytics and attribution challenge, it's just going to be complex. And so that's why we think that a graph database type of infrastructure is going to be so necessary, because everything that we want will still be possible, but just more fragmented and a lot more complicated, as long as also there's no cooperation happening in the industry. So if you believe that there will not be any cooperation, which I kind of do, because it's part of what gives people their defensible differentiators, I think that's going to be a major marketer's challenge. And I think that's how the industry will look like in the coming future.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us. That was incredibly helpful. For those of you who are watching and have additional questions, feel free to visit themakeitbloom.com to reach out to us, or visit Clue's website at cluedigital.com. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.